Chapter 1. The Gathering at Ravenhall. The countryside of Kent lay beneath a veil of mist that autumn afternoon, a fine silver fog that softened the edges of hedgerows and spread a melancholy air over the stately homes that dotted the landscape. Among them, none was more imposing than Ravenhall, a sprawling Elizabethan mansion with high gables, tall chimneys, and windows that glimmered like watchful eyes across the damp lawns. It was here that a curious company had assembled, ostensibly for a weekend celebration, though beneath the polite chatter there ran a nervous undercurrent, as though some dark note had been struck that none dared to acknowledge. The host, Sir Everard Vale, stood near the great stone fireplace of the drawing-room, his shoulders stiff beneath his tailored suit. A man in his late 60s, with a bristling white moustache and eyes still sharp despite his years, Sir Everard carried himself with the authority of one accustomed to obedience. Yet even he seemed distracted, glancing now and again at the tall windows as though he half expected some phantom to emerge from the fog. Beside him, Lady Constance Vale, pale and elegant in a gown of soft grey silk, poured tea for the assembled guests. Her manner was one of forced serenity, but her hands trembled ever so slightly as she passed a cup to the young bride who sat opposite her. Eleanor Ashworth, now Eleanor Vale, wed but 3 months ago to Sir Everard's only son. Eleanor was the picture of youthful charm, her dark curls framing a face more spirited than pretty, though her wide eyes held a restless intensity. She was quick with a laugh, yet quicker still to cast searching glances about the room, as if alert to every nuance of the gathering. Her husband, Henry Vale, lounged in a chair a little apart, his long fingers drumming idly on the armrest. Henry was handsome in the careless fashion of English aristocracy, with fair hair and a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. His marriage, whispered the county gossips, had been something of a surprise, hurried, secretive, and lacking the grandeur expected of the Vale family. Some said Henry had fallen violently in love, others suggested Eleanor had brought with her certain debts or entanglements, best left unspoken. Around the room, the circle of guests presented a tableau of English society in miniature. There was Colonel Arbuthnot, retired from the army, ruddy-faced and booming of voice, his anecdotes of India punctuated with hearty laughter. Near him sat Miss Lydia Greaves, Sir Everard's ward, a young woman of grave expression and severe beauty, who watched Henry Vale with eyes that betrayed an emotion deeper than mere cousinly regard. Mr. Jasper Harwood, the family solicitor, leaned against the mantel with an air of faint condescension, his thin lips pursed in habitual disapproval. He seemed to take a proprietary interest in the household, his gaze flicking often towards Eleanor, as though measuring her against some private standard. And then there was Dr. Felix Morton, a genial country physician whose round spectacles lent him the look of perpetual surprise. He had attended the Vale family for years, and spoke with the familiarity of an old friend. The conversation flowed in fits and starts, turning from the fog to the news from London, then stumbling into silence whenever the name of Eleanor arose. For though she smiled and spoke with grace, it was clear she was a stranger among them, the interloper bride whose place at Ravenhall was not yet secured in the hearts of its inhabitants. At last Sir Everard raised his voice. "My friends," he declared, "it is a joy to see you gathered here. Ravenhall has stood for centuries weathering storm and strife, and it pleases me that it should yet be a place of companionship and festivity. Tonight we shall dine in the great hall, and tomorrow I hope the weather will permit a hunt." He glanced at his son, who stifled a yawn. Eleanor, however, leaned forward with animation. "How splendid," she said. "I adore the countryside. It is so very different from London." A faint, knowing smile touched the lips of Miss Greaves. "Indeed," she murmured, "it has its own peculiarities." The remark, though innocent on the surface, carried a weight that made Eleanor flush. Lady Constance quickly intervened with a suggestion that they all refresh themselves before dinner. As the party dispersed, Eleanor lingered by the window, gazing into the gathering fog. Henry joined her, his voice low, but edged with impatience. "Must you always set yourself against them, Nell?" "It is wearying." She turned to him swiftly, her eyes flashing. "I set myself against no one, Henry. But I will not be made to feel unwelcome in my own home." Before he could reply, the butler entered to announce that rooms had been prepared. Eleanor swept past her husband without another word, her silken gown whispering against the floorboards. Later, as the bells tolled the hour of 7, the guests reassembled for dinner. The great hall of Raven Hall glittered with candlelight, shadows dancing across tapestries that depicted hunting scenes and long-forgotten battles. The meal was lavish, yet beneath the sparkle of silverware and the murmur of polite conversation there lay an uneasy tension. It was during the final course, as brandy was being poured, that Eleanor rose suddenly from her seat. "Forgive me," she said with a faint smile. "I feel a little faint." The air, perhaps the fog. Henry half rose, but she waved him back, insisting she merely needed a moment. Lady Constance called for the maid to escort her to her room. The remainder of the dinner passed without incident, though conversation faltered. One by one the guests retired. By 11 the house had fallen silent, save for the moan of the wind through the chimneys. Morning broke pale and cold. Servants moved quietly through the corridors, drawing curtains, and lighting fires. Yet when the maid went to attend to Mrs. Vale, she found the room empty. The bed had not been slept in. Eleanor had vanished. Her gown from the night before lay draped over a chair. Her jewel case stood open upon the dressing table, and on the floor, near the French doors that opened onto the terrace, was a single slipper, delicate satin and abandoned. Chapter 2. The Vanishing. The chill of morning clung stubbornly to the corridors of Raven Hall as the household stirred. A thin frost had settled upon the lawns, and the mist that had veiled the grounds the previous evening now drifted low, like smoke from some unseen fire. It was under this pale and uneasy dawn that the alarm was raised. The maid, Agnes, had gone to rouse Mrs. Vale, as was her duty. Knocking softly at first and then more firmly, she received no answer. At last she pushed open the door and entered, only to halt abruptly, her tray clattering to the floor with a crash that rang down the corridor. The bed lay untouched, its covers smooth. The jewel case upon the dressing table stood open, yet nothing appeared to be missing. The French doors that led onto the terrace stood slightly ajar, letting in a breath of icy air. And on the floor, so close to the threshold that the hem of the curtain brushed it, lay a single satin slipper. Agnes screamed. Within moments, Lady Constance herself hurried in, her face ashen. She took in the scene with a single sharp glance before commanding the maid to fetch her husband. By the time Sir Everard arrived, his hair still tousled from sleep, the corridor was alive with whispers. Colonel Arbuthnot, summoned by the commotion, demanded to know what had occurred. Miss Greaves stood pale and rigid, her fingers clenched upon the banister. Henry Vale burst into the room at last, his dressing gown thrown hastily about him. "What is it?" Henry cried, his voice hoarse. "Where is Eleanor?" Lady Constance raised a trembling hand toward the open doors. "She has gone, Henry." "She has gone into the night." Sir Everard muttered an oath beneath his breath and strode across the room, his boots crunching upon the frost that had crept in from outside. He flung the doors wide, revealing the terrace beyond. The stone flags glistened faintly with dew. Beyond, the gardens dissolved into a thick wall of mist. "There are footprints," Colonel Arbuthnot announced, stooping with surprising agility for a man of his years. "Small ones, leading away from the terrace. A woman's. I'll be bound." Henry pushed past him, his eyes darting wildly. "Eleanor! Eleanor!" His voice rang hollow against the fog, carrying no answer. Dr. Morton appeared presently, summoned from his quarters by a servant. He bent over the slipper, lifting it gingerly. Dropped in haste, perhaps. There is no sign of struggle here. But why should she wander out alone in the dark and in this chill? The question hung in the air, grim and accusing. Lady Constance shook her head despairingly. She was not herself last night. You saw it. She excused herself from dinner, said she felt faint. Perhaps she grew restless in the night and went out. The air, the fog, it may have confused her. Nonsense, Sir Everard cut in sharply. She is no sleepwalker. If she left this house, it was for a reason. Henry's face hardened. And what reason could that be, father? No one replied. The silence seemed to press upon them all, until Miss Greaves spoke in her low, deliberate voice. "There is the river," she said, her eyes fixed upon the mist. "It runs not far from the gardens." A collective shiver passed through the group. The thought had come unbidden to them all, yet none had dared give it voice. Henry made a sudden movement toward the steps, but Colonel Arbuthnot caught his arm. "Steady, my boy. We must search, yes, but with order. Half a dozen of us blundering into the fog will do no good. Let us call the servants, form a line, and sweep the grounds." Sir Everard gave a curt nod. "See to it. Every inch of the gardens, the river bank, the woods. Leave no stone unturned." And so, under the pale and reluctant sun, the search began. The grounds of Ravenhall were extensive, sweeping lawns that led to shadowed groves of yew and oak, tangled hedgerows that bordered the gardens, and beyond them the sluggish, winding river. Servants armed with lanterns spread out across the estate, their calls echoing faintly through the mist. Dogs were brought from the kennels, their excited barks soon muffled by the fog. Yet, as the hours wore on, no trace of Eleanor Vale was found. No torn scrap of fabric, no discarded trinket, no cry for help from the river bank. Only those faint footprints upon the terrace, fading quickly as the frost melted in the morning sun. By midday the household had gathered once more in the drawing-room, faces drawn and weary. Henry stood by the window, his eyes burning with an intensity that made even the Colonel fall silent. Lady Constance sat upon a chaise, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. Sir Everard paced the hearth like a caged beast, muttering in short, clipped phrases. It was then that Jasper Harwood, the solicitor, spoke for the first time that day. "We must face the truth," he said in his dry, precise tone. "The young lady has vanished. Whether by her own volition or by misadventure I cannot say, but the matter is grave and it cannot be kept within these walls. The authorities must be notified." His words fell like a stone into still water. "Scandal, Harwood!" Sir Everard roared. "Do you think I will have the name of Vale dragged through the papers like some common criminal case? We shall manage this ourselves until we are certain." "Certain of what?" Miss Greaves interjected, her voice trembling now. "That Eleanor is dead?" Lady Constance let out a low cry, and Henry turned on her fiercely. "You dare say such a thing? You hated her, Lydia, admit it." The girl recoiled, colour rising in her cheeks. "I did not hate her. But I saw what you would not see, that she was unhappy. You thought her radiant, devoted, but she lived in fear, Henry. I know it. I saw it in her eyes." Her words seemed to strike him like a blow. He staggered a step back, his hand gripping the curtain for support. Sir Everard's face grew dark. "Enough. This is unseemly. We shall wait. Eleanor may yet return. Until then, no word of this leaves Ravenhall. Do you understand? No word." The others exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared defy him. Outside, the fog clung stubbornly to the lawns, as if refusing to release its secrets, and somewhere within its depths, the truth of Eleanor Vale's fate lay hidden. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Hercule Poirot. On the following afternoon, as the grey skies deepened and the fog refused to lift from the valley, a motor car wound its way along the narrow country lanes leading to Ravenhall. Its arrival was unheralded, save by the crunch of gravel beneath its tyres and the startled gaze of a gardener who lingered near the gates. Out stepped a small, fastidious figure, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit of dark grey and wearing a bowler hat placed at the precise angle of correctness. He removed a pair of immaculate gloves, tucked them into his breast pocket, and looked up at the looming facade of Ravenhall with an expression at once appreciative and critical. His moustaches, the finest, most luxuriant in all England, quivered slightly as he drew in the damp, heavy air. "Mon Dieu," murmured Hercule Poirot, "it is as if the house itself sits in mourning." Behind him appeared a tall, ruddy-faced gentleman with the air of genial confusion about him. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the faithful chronicler of Poirot's adventures, gave a little shiver as he surveyed the great house. "Grim-looking place, eh, Poirot? I can't say it strikes me as the sort of house where one would expect a wedding celebration. More like something out of a Gothic tale." Poirot patted his friend's arm affectionately. "You observe truly, Hastings. Ravenhall has the air of tragedy, and it is here, mon ami, that tragedy has indeed paid a visit." The butler received them at the door with stiff formality, though even his professional demeanour could not mask the anxiety that hung heavy over the household. "If you will step inside, gentlemen. Sir Everard is expecting you." They were ushered into the drawing-room, where the atmosphere was as taut as a wire. Sir Everard stood by the fireplace, his formidable presence undiminished despite the strain that shadowed his face. Lady Constance sat beside him, pale and silent. Henry paced restlessly near the window, while Lydia Greaves lingered at the writing desk, her expression guarded. Colonel Arbuthnot was ensconced in an armchair, his pipe unlit, and Mr. Harwood the solicitor hovered, like a dark bird of ill omen. "Monsieur Poirot and Hastings," announced the butler. Sir Everard stepped forward, extending a firm hand. "Monsieur Poirot, I thank you for coming on such short notice. The matter is delicate, and I would have it handled with the utmost discretion." Poirot bowed slightly. "You're too kind. I was in London when your telegram reached me. It spoke of a disappearance, most mysterious." "I come at once." Henry turned abruptly, his face pale with sleeplessness. "You must help us, Monsieur Poirot?" "My wife, Eleanor, she's gone, vanished. No one knows how or why. We have searched the grounds from end to end." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Be calm, monsieur. We shall use the little grey cells. They will tell us what has occurred." Lady Constance stirred. "Monsieur Poirot, it is as though she has melted into the mist. One moment she was here, the next, nothing. A slipper left by the door, footprints across the terrace, and then obliterated by the dew." Hastings frowned. "Sounds dashed peculiar, Poirot. If she left of her own accord, why no cloak, no handbag? And if she was taken, well, surely someone would have heard." Poirot spread his hands. "The mystery, Hastings, is complete. That is why we are here. Tell me, Sir Everard, why have you not summoned the police?" The old man stiffened. "I will not have the Vale name paraded through the scandal sheets. If foul play has been done, then let it be discovered with discretion. If she has fled of her own will, then we may yet avert disgrace." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Très bien. We shall see what can be done. But I must have liberty to question all who are present, and to examine the house and grounds most thoroughly. No detail is too small, no servant too humble. You comprehend?" Sir Everard inclined his head stiffly. "You shall have free rein, Monsieur Poirot." The first interview was with Henry Vale. Poirot led him to the library, where the heavy curtains muffled the afternoon light. "Now, monsieur," Poirot began gently, "you must tell me all. When did you last see your wife?" Henry raked a hand through his hair. "At dinner. She left early, said she felt faint. I saw her rise, smiling at us all as though nothing were amiss. I was to join her later, but when I went up she was not in her room. And since then, nothing." Poirot regarded him keenly. "And in your marriage, monsieur, was Madame Vale content? Did she have, how shall we say, secrets?" Henry flushed. "Eleanor and I were happy, perfectly happy. You must not believe otherwise." "Yet," Poirot murmured, "one may love and yet conceal. Did she ever speak of fear? Of someone she mistrusted?" "No," Henry said fiercely, though the denial seemed almost too swift. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch. Then with a little shrug he dismissed him and requested Miss Greaves. Lydia entered composed, her dark eyes steady upon Poirot. She did not wait for his questions. "You wish to know if I disliked Eleanor Vale?" "Very well, I did. She was unsuited to this house, to Henry, to our family. She brought unease wherever she went. But I did not wish her harm." Poirot inclined his head. "You're frank, mademoiselle. Tell me, what did you observe at dinner that last evening?" Lydia hesitated. She seemed distracted. She laughed. "Yes, but it was forced. I thought she was afraid of something, though whether of this house or of someone within it I could not say." Poirot's moustaches twitched thoughtfully. "Très curieux. You see much, mademoiselle, and perhaps you see more than you permit yourself to speak." Her gaze flickered at that, but she said nothing further. Later, as dusk began to gather once more over the misted lawns, Poirot and Hastings strolled together upon the terrace. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" Hastings asked. "The whole thing seems beyond belief. A young woman vanishes into thin air. Could she have eloped, perhaps?" Poirot shook his head gravely. "Non, mon ami. If Madame Vale fled, why leave behind her jewels? Why not take her cloak, her money? And yet, if she was taken, why no cry, no struggle, no sign? It is most unnatural." He paused, stooping to examine the stone flags where the slipper had been found. "Ah, regardez, Hastings. Here." A faint trace of something. Hastings bent down, frowning. I can't see a thing. Poirot smiled faintly. That is because you look with the eyes, Hastings. One must look also with the mind. There is a pattern here, and it is most irregular. He straightened, his eyes gleaming. Already the little grey cells begin to whisper to me. But we must be patient. Soon all will be clear, and with that, Hercule Poirot turned back toward Ravenhall, the fog curling at his heels like a living thing. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The next morning dawned wan and sullen, a pale sun barely piercing the lingering fog that hung about Ravenhall like a shroud. The house itself seemed subdued, its occupants gathered at breakfast with strained faces and little appetite. Poirot, neat and composed as ever, partook only of coffee and a small brioche produced by the butler at his request, a deviation from the English fare of eggs and ham, which he eyed with mild disapproval. "Messieurs, mesdames," he said, setting down his cup, "it is now the hour to begin. One by one I shall speak with you, and you will tell me, with precision, of all that occurred on the evening of Madame Vale's disappearance, the smallest detail, a word, a glance, an object moved, may be of significance. You comprehend?" His gaze swept the table, and one by one the company nodded, some stiffly, some with palpable relief that at last action was being taken. Interview I. Lady Constance Vale. The morning room with its tall windows and pale draperies was chosen for the interrogations. Lady Constance was the first to enter, her fragile elegance enhanced by a shawl about her shoulders. She seated herself with a faint sigh, as if even this small effort was an ordeal. "Madame," Poirot began gently, "you are a woman of sensibility. Tell me, how did you perceive your daughter-in-law on that last evening?" Lady Constance's fingers toyed nervously with the fringe of her shawl. "She seemed unsettled, Monsieur Poirot. Her laughter was too quick, her colour too high. I thought the company strained her. She was not at ease in Ravenhall, though she tried bravely to appear so. When she excused herself from dinner, I believed it nothing more than a touch of faintness. Did she confide in you? Of troubles, of fears?" A hesitation. Once she spoke vaguely of dreams, nightmares perhaps. She mentioned shadows at the window, though I told her it was nothing but the trees stirring in the wind. She was impressionable. Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. "Merci, madame. One last question. When the alarm was raised, you seemed most insistent that she might have wandered off by confusion. Was that truly your belief, or merely hope?" Her eyes filled suddenly with tears. "Hope, Monsieur Poirot. Always hope. Interview 2. Colonel Arbuthnot." The colonel entered with a soldier's briskness, his ruddy cheeks contrasting with the gloom of the house. He took the chair as though at a court-martial. "Now then, Poirot, I'll tell you what I know. The girl left the dinner table early. Nothing amiss in that. Later, when the commotion began, I was the first to spy the footprints on the terrace. Small feet, woman's shoes, no mistake. Did you follow them?" "Only a short way. They petered out on the damp grass. Nothing to show where she went." Poirot regarded him steadily. "You're a man of observation, Colonel. Did you notice anything else unusual? A sound, a figure, a light?" The colonel frowned, tugging at his moustache. "Now you mention it. I did think I heard a door bang somewhere about 11:30. Might have been the wind, mind you. This old house creaks and groans like a barracks in a gale." Poirot nodded slowly. "Every sound, every creak may speak. See, Colonel. Interview 3. Jasper Harwood." The solicitor came with his usual air of disapproval. His thin lips pursed. He looked as though he found the entire proceeding distasteful, though Poirot's keen eyes missed nothing of the faint sheen of sweat upon his brow. "Monsieur Harwood, you have long known the Vale family. What, then, was your opinion of Madame Vale?" "She was unsuitable," Harwood replied coldly. "Charming enough in manner, but lacking in stability. I fear she was ill-prepared for the responsibilities of this household." "Unsuitable," Poirot repeated softly. "And yet she was chosen by Monsieur Henri. Did you warn him?" Harwood's expression hardened. "It is not my place to dictate my client's choice of bride. Still, I feared her presence would bring complications." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Complications? Of a financial nature, perhaps?" Harwood hesitated. "I merely advise where I can. Eleanor Vale's background was not entirely free of encumbrance. Debts, family troubles, nothing criminal, you understand, but undesirable. Poirot inclined his head. You are precise, Monsieur Harwood. It is a virtue, though sometimes precision conceals more than it reveals. Harwood's lips pressed together until they nearly vanished. Interview 4. Dr. Felix Morton. Dr. Morton bustled in, spectacles glinting, his manner jovial yet edged with discomfort. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, a sad business, very sad. I knew the girl scarcely 3 months, yet she seemed spirited. A pity, a real pity. You attended her, doctor? Only once or twice. Nerves, nothing more. I prescribed a tonic. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Nerves, and yet Lady Constance speaks of shadows, of nightmares. Did Madame Vale confide fears to you? Morton cleared his throat. Well, she hinted at anxieties, spoke of being watched, though I told her it was imagination. Ravenhall can weigh upon a newcomer. The house is oppressive. Oppressive, yes, Poirot murmured. And yet, doctor, it is often not the house that oppresses, but the people within it. Morton shifted uneasily in his seat. Interview. Henry Vale. At last came. Henry, restless and pale, his eyes bloodshot with sleeplessness. He flung himself into the chair as though exhausted. Poirot, I beg you, find her. Questioning us will do no good. She's gone, perhaps taken, perhaps... His voice broke. Poirot raised a hand. Courage, monsieur. You loved your wife? With all my heart. She was everything to me. And yet, there were quarrels, perhaps? Henry flinched. What marriage is free of quarrels? But nothing serious. She was nervous, yes. Sometimes she accused me of secrecy. She thought I kept things from her. But it was nonsense, nonsense, Poirot repeated gently. And yet you admit she feared you withheld. Tell me, monsieur, where were you precisely at the hour between 10:30 and midnight? Henry looked up sharply. In my room. Reading. Alone. Alone, Poirot echoed. His eyes rested upon Henry with quiet intensity, and for a moment the younger man faltered. Then he rose abruptly. That is all I can tell you. When the last of the interviews was concluded, Poirot joined Hastings in the library, where the fire burned low. Well, Poirot, Hastings asked eagerly, have you learned anything? Poirot placed his fingertips together, his eyes half closed. Mais oui, Hastings. I have learned that every soul in this house hides something. They speak with courtesy, with grief, with indignation. Yet beneath there is concealment. Madame Vale has vanished, but it is not into the mist, alone. Non. She has vanished into a web, spun here at Ravenhall. Hastings stared. You mean one of them knows the truth? Poirot opened his eyes sharp and gleaming. One of them, Hastings? Non, non. All of them know more than they have told. The question is, which truth is the truth of murder, and which is but the truth of pride, of shame, of love unspoken? He leaned back, smiling faintly. Patience, mon ami. The little grey cells are already most busy. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The following day at Ravenhall dawned with little promise. A raw wind had risen in the night, chasing the fog into ragged tatters that clung stubbornly about the woods and riverbank. The air was sharper, the sky a leaden grey that seemed to press low upon the house and its troubled inhabitants. Within, the mood was equally oppressive. No laughter, no cheerful greetings marked the breakfast table. Each guest sat apart in their thoughts, and only the scraping of cutlery and the occasional rustle of a newspaper disturbed the silence. Poirot, however, was as immaculate as ever, his moustaches waxed to perfection, his shoes gleaming as though untouched by English mud. Hastings noted, with admiration mingled with exasperation, that his friend seemed entirely immune to the gloom. At last Sir Everard cleared his throat. This cannot continue, he declared. If Eleanor is not found, we must assume she is... His voice faltered, and he amended stiffly. We must assume she will not return. Henry sprang to his feet. How dare you speak so, father? She is alive. Somewhere. She must be. It was Jasper Harwood, the solicitor, who broke in with icy precision. And yet, Henry, the evidence points otherwise. her slipper left behind, her bed untouched, no cloak, no money. It is the act of a woman who goes not by choice, but by compulsion. If that is so, then compulsion implies an agent. Someone here may know more than he admits. A murmur of indignation arose. The Colonel muttered about dashed impertinence. Lydia Greaves paled, and Lady Constance closed her eyes with a faint cry. Poirot lifted a hand, his voice calm but commanding. Messieurs, mesdames, let us not quarrel. Already there are whispers of suspicion. Let us examine them, calmly, as we must, the obvious suspect. By noon, Poirot and Hastings found themselves once more upon the terrace, surveying the scene where Eleanor's slipper had been discovered. The chill wind tugged at Hastings' coat as he spoke. Poirot, there's one thing I can't get out of my head. Those footprints across the terrace, they end abruptly, no sign of her beyond. Could it be she never left at all? That someone staged the scene to make it look as though she had? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Just so, Hastings. Always you seize one thread, though you do not yet see the tapestry. It is possible, indeed likely, that what we see is but a tableau, arranged to deceive. Hastings frowned. But then who would stage such a thing? Poirot turned slowly, his gaze travelling toward the house. Consider, mon ami, who had the most to gain if Eleanor Vale vanished? Who was most opposed to her presence in this family? Miss Greaves, Hastings said at once. By Jove, Poirot, it fits. She loved Henry. It was plain enough. Eleanor stood in her way. If Eleanor were gone? Poirot inclined his head. A motive? Yes, and a strong one. Add to this. What did she tell us? That Eleanor seemed afraid. That she was unsuited. That she did not belong. Words that could be sympathy or words that might prepare the ground for suspicion of others. Hastings, it is possible Mademoiselle Greaves is at the heart of this mystery. A search of Lydia's room. It was with Sir Everard's reluctant consent that Poirot requested a quiet examination of the rooms occupied by the guests. Lydia's chamber, situated along the eastern corridor, was as austere as its occupant. Dark oak furniture, a narrow bed neatly made, books arranged in careful order upon a shelf. Poirot's eyes missed nothing. He bent to examine a small blotter upon the writing desk. A faint impression of writing remained, though the page itself had been torn away. He traced it delicately with his fingertip, then smiled. Observe, Hastings. A letter begun, then destroyed. See here. The words, my dearest H-, faintly visible. H for Henry, perhaps? Hastings whistled. Then she did care for him more than she admitted. Exactement. And here, a drawer hastily closed. Regardez, the fibres of fabric caught. A piece of ribbon torn from some garment. Hastings. These are the trifles that betray the truth. Before Hastings could reply, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Lydia herself entered, her face pale as marble when she saw them. What are you doing here? She demanded, her voice trembling. Poirot inclined his head politely. Forgive me, mademoiselle. We examine only, with permission of Sir Everard. You understand, the disappearance of Madame Vale demands thoroughness. Lydia's eyes flashed. You believe I had something to do with it? That I wanted her gone. Well, yes, I did. I despised her. I admit it. But to harm her? Never. If you think me capable of such a crime, you are wrong, Monsieur Poirot. She turned and fled, the door slamming behind her. Hastings shook his head. Looks dashed incriminating, Poirot. She as much as confessed, Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, Hastings. How quick you are to judge. But passion is not the same as crime. To hate, to desire, these are human, but to murder, that is something else. Gossip among servants. That evening Poirot contrived to speak with Agnes, the maid who had discovered Eleanor missing. She was a timid girl, easily flustered, yet under Poirot's kindly encouragement she grew more at ease. Miss Greaves, sir? Agnes repeated, wide-eyed. Oh, she was always stern with the servants, not unkind, but cold. As for Mrs. Vale, she was different. She would smile at me, speak gentle-like, but— She hesitated. But mademoiselle, Poirot prompted softly. Well, sir, I did once hear Miss Greaves say to Mrs. Vale, You will never belong here. Ravenhall has no place for you. Mrs. Vale laughed, but it was a queer sort of laugh, as though she was frightened. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Très intéressant. Merci, my child. You have been most helpful." When she had gone, Hastings said, "There you have it, Poirot. Proof," Lydia warned her off. "She must have lured Eleanor outside, and then—" Poirot raised a finger. "Patience, mon ami. We have evidence of dislike, of rivalry, but not yet of disappearance. A red herring, perhaps." Poirot reflects. That night, alone in his chamber, Poirot sat polishing his moustaches before the mirror, his little eyes thoughtful. "Ah, Lydia grieves," he murmured. "So obvious, so apparent. The jealous woman scorned. The rival bride. Hastings would hang you already. And yet, non. You're too obvious. The murderer, if murderer there be, has the subtlety, the cunning. He hides behind such easy suspicions." He paused, gazing at his reflection. "No, no. You, Mademoiselle Greaves, may hate, but another hates more cleverly. The truth lies hidden still, but soon it will show itself. It must. Chapter 6. A clue in detail. The morning that followed was brighter than any since Eleanor Vale's disappearance. A weak sun pushed its way through the haze, gilding the frost upon the lawns and scattering the shadows that clung about the yews. Yet within Ravenhall the atmosphere remained heavy, its inhabitants moving like players in a grim play whose conclusion none could foresee. Poirot, however, seemed more animated than ever. His step was brisk, his moustaches twitched with suppressed energy, and his eyes gleamed with an almost boyish light. Hastings, observing him over the breakfast table, could not contain his curiosity. "You've thought of something, Poirot," he said. "You've the look you always wear when a puzzle piece has fallen into place. Out with it, man." Poirot's lips curved in a small smile. "Mon cher Hastings, you have the zeal of the hunt, but not always the patience of the hunter. There is indeed something, a trifle, a detail, one of those little things which others pass over but which to Hercule Poirot is as the spark to the flame. But hush, let us not proclaim it yet. We must test it, verify it, eh?" "Always the order and method, Henry," haggard and restless, broke in irritably. "What good are trifles? My wife is gone, perhaps dead, and you sit here speaking of details. If you know something, say it at once." Poirot regarded him with grave compassion. "Monsieur, it is precisely in the trifle that we find the truth. The great crime, it leaves its trace not in the obvious, but in the small. Permit me a little time, and you shall see." The slipper Poirot's first act was to request once more the satin slipper, the one found abandoned by the French doors. The butler produced it with solemn care, placing it upon the table in the morning room. Poirot bent over it as though it were some relic of great antiquity. "Regardez, Hastings, a slipper of white satin, dainty, much worn. Yet see here, the sole is scarcely soiled at all, though it lay upon the terrace stones, and here, this small abrasion near the heel. Tell me, what do you see?" Hastings frowned. "Looks like a scuff." She might have stumbled, perhaps. But note the direction of the abrasion, not downward, as with walking, but upward, as though scraped against the stone when it was placed upon the ground, not when trodden. "Ah, do you not see, mon ami?" This slipper was not dropped. It was set down. Hastings stared. "Good Lord, Poirot! I mean, Hastings, that what we saw was a picture, a stage arranged for our eyes. Madame Vale's disappearance was meant to appear voluntary, hasty, but the slipper betrays the artifice." The curtain cord. Later that morning, Poirot made a quiet inspection of Eleanor's chamber. Nothing escaped his notice. The smooth bed, the open jewel case, the half-drawn curtains. He paused, running a finger delicately along the heavy drapery cords. "Voila," he murmured. "Hastings, look closely. The tassel here, it is frayed. See? Threads pulled, as though grasped in a sudden clutch, and here the cord is stretched slightly from its place." Hastings bent to examine it. "By Jove, you're right. But what does it mean?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "It means, my friend, that Madame Vale resisted something, or someone. She clutched at the curtain cord, perhaps in fear, perhaps in desperation. Yet no sound was heard, no cry raised. Pourquoi? Was she silenced, or did she go willingly, concealing her alarm? That, Hastings, is the question. An offhand remark. At luncheon, Poirot placed himself between Colonel Arbuthnot and Dr. Morton. The talk was subdued, each guest careful of his words under Poirot's scrutiny. It was the Colonel who broke the silence. his voice booming with forced heartiness. "Dashed queer business, eh, Poirot? Reminds me of a case in India. Fellow vanished into thin air only to be found 2 days later hiding in a water tank. Mark my words, the girl will turn up in some outbuilding, laughing at our fuss." Lady Constance shuddered. "Colonel, how can you jest so?" Eleanor was no trifler, Dr. Morton chuckled uneasily. "Ah, but she had a nervous imagination. Why, only last week she came to me, insisting she had seen someone standing in the orchard by moonlight. No one there, of course. Mere fancies." Poirot's head turned sharply. "Pardon, Doctor, she saw someone. Did she say who?" "Why, no. Only that the figure vanished when she approached. Hallucination, I told her." Poirot's eyes glowed. "Mais non, Doctor, not hallucination. Never dismiss the fears of a woman. They are often founded on truth, though dressed in imagination. That, Hastings, is what you English forget." Poirot's notebook that evening. In the solitude of the library, Poirot drew forth his little notebook. Hastings, hovering at his shoulder, saw him write 3 words in his neat hand: slipper, placed cord, frayed figure, orchard. He underlined each twice, then closed the book with a snap. "Hastings," he said softly, "you recall I spoke of a trifle. It is no longer trifle. It is a thread. Already I begin to see the weave." "Then you know what happened?" Hastings asked breathlessly. Poirot smiled. "Not yet, mon ami. But I know this. The disappearance of Madame Vale was no simple flight. It was contrived, and the contriver, he is here, among us. One of these so polished guests, so respectable, so courteous. He plays his part, but he has overlooked the detail, and that will betray him." The late-night discovery. That night, long after the others had retired, Poirot moved silently along the eastern corridor. Hastings, reluctantly accompanying him, shivered at the draughts that sighed through the old house. Poirot paused outside a small door half hidden by a tapestry. "Ah, Hastings. A door little used. Let us see." He opened it to reveal a narrow stair descending into darkness. With lantern in hand, they descended cautiously, emerging into a disused storeroom smelling of damp stone. And there, upon the floor, half buried under dust and cobwebs, lay a crumpled scrap of paper. Poirot lifted it delicately. It was the missing page from Lydia Greaves's blotter. The words, faint but legible, read, "My dearest H, I cannot endure it. If she remains, I shall lose all. Meet me tonight, and we will speak of what must be done." Hastings gasped. "Good heavens!" "That settles it, Poirot." Lydia and Henry plotted together. Poirot tucked the page into his pocket, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps, Hastings. Or perhaps it is yet another tableau, a red herring planted for us to find. But whether true or false, this letter changes everything." The drama of Ravenhall draws toward its heart. He extinguished the lantern, his eyes gleaming in the dark. And Hercule Poirot, he will be ready. Murder behind the velvet curtains. A Hercule Poirot. Mystery. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The rain fell in a fine silvery drizzle that morning, veiling the gardens of Ravenwood and turning the gravel paths to mud. The household, confined within the great house, seemed restless, like actors waiting for the cue to step upon a stage. Tension hung in the corridors, heavier even than the damp air. Inspector Graves wasted little time. He was a man who disliked subtleties, and already his suspicions had taken firm root. By midday, he summoned Poirot and Hastings to the library with an air of quiet triumph. "Mark my words, gentlemen," he announced, "this case is as good as solved." "We have our man Poirot," raised his eyebrows. "Indeed?" "Already. Mon cher inspecteur, you're quick. And who is it that has attracted your eagle eye?" Graves closed his notebook with satisfaction. "Colonel Stratton." The case against the Colonel. The inspector laid out his reasoning with the confidence of a man accustomed to straightforward crimes. First, motive. The Colonel was owed a considerable sum by Sir Reginald. There had been a quarrel only last week in the village inn, witnessed by several. Stratton pressed his claim. Sir Reginald refused him. Tempers ran high. That's one. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Motive? Yes. And the opportunity? Plenty of it. Stratton admits to being outside on the terrace. Convenient, that. The gardener saw him walking, yes, but not all the time. He could easily have slipped inside, tampered with the brandy, and returned. Hastings frowned. But surely, Graves, the glass was in the drawing room, not the decanter. Precisely, Graves said, tapping his notebook. The Colonel knows his way around a bottle. He was seen earlier handling the decanter, pouring himself a drink, so the butler claims. He could have kept a vial of cyanide in his pocket, dropped it in Sir Reginald's glass when the chance arose. And one more thing. We found traces of tobacco ash on the carpet near the armchair. Stratton smokes a pipe. The evidence is piling up. Hastings looked impressed. Well, dash it all, Poirot. That does sound rather conclusive. Poirot did not reply at once. He adjusted the angle of his tie-pin, then said softly, "Conclusive, Hastings? Or convenient?" Poirot's quiet. Doubts. Poirot requested to see the pipe ash. Inspector Graves obliged, producing a small envelope. Poirot opened it delicately, lifting a pinch of the grey flakes to his nose. He murmured. "Curious. This is not pipe tobacco at all, but cigarette ash. A fine blend, Turkish, I think. Our Colonel, he smokes the rough English tobacco. Much heavier." Graves scowled. Still, the ash was found there. "Ah, but the ash is a most deceitful witness," Poirot replied, eyes twinkling. "It goes where the careless hand leaves it." "It tells us nothing of the man who sat in that chair." Poirot returned the envelope with a little bow, but inwardly he was already certain. The Colonel was being framed. The Colonel confronted. Nevertheless, Graves wasted no time in confronting Stratton. The household was gathered once more in the drawing room when the inspector delivered his verdict. "Colonel Stratton," he said sternly, "you had motive, you had opportunity, and the evidence of the ash speaks against you. I must ask that you remain under guard until further notice." The Colonel exploded with fury. "What infernal nonsense is this? Me? A murderer? Good God, man, I've fought in 3 campaigns. Do you think I'd stoop to slipping poison into a fellow's drink like some sneaking scoundrel?" Lady Eleanor gave a little cry and clasped her niece's hand. Miss Ashcroft scribbled furiously in her notebook, clearly relishing the drama. Leonard Drake smirked faintly, as though relieved suspicion had passed from himself. Poirot watched in silence, fingers steepled, head inclined. Only Hastings, who knew the signs, noticed the faint smile twitching at the detective's lips. Poirot's observations. Later, in the privacy of the study, Hastings turned on Poirot. "But dash it, Poirot, why didn't you speak up? You know the ash isn't from the Colonel's pipe. You could have cleared him on the spot." Poirot spread his hands. "Ah, mon ami, sometimes it is wise to let suspicion play its little role. Do you not see? If the murderer has gone to the trouble of planting evidence, then he will be watching closely to see if it succeeds. And in watching, perhaps he will betray himself." Hastings looked doubtful. "Seems a bit hard on the Colonel." Poirot gave him a reproving glance. "My dear Hastings, in the hunt for the truth, one must sometimes let the false trail be followed, to its end. Only then can the real path be seen. An unexpected clue." That evening, as the household retired, Poirot lingered once more in the drawing-room. The velvet curtains stirred faintly in a draught, and Poirot examined them with fastidious care. His fingers found, lodged in the heavy folds, a small object, a broken cuff-link, plain but of expensive make. He slipped it into his pocket, his eyes alight with triumph. "So," he murmured, "the Colonel, he does not wear cuff-links at all, but another does, and he has left behind him the little token of his carelessness." Poirot glanced toward the staircase, where Leonard Drake had just bid Clara good night with exaggerated courtesy. The financier's sleeve was buttoned not with a cuff-link but with a hastily fastened button. Poirot's moustaches quivered. The red herring was cast, but the true fish swam yet in the dark waters. The household reacts. The next morning the atmosphere at Ravenwood was even more strained. The Colonel stalked the halls like a caged lion, furious at the suspicion cast upon him. Lady Eleanor avoided the company, weeping quietly in her room. Clara flitted nervously about while Reverend Hargreaves grew more withdrawn, muttering half-prayers under his breath. Miss Ashcroft, of course, was delighted. "It is the most perfect situation," she confided to Hastings with ghoulish enthusiasm. "A red-handed soldier, a poisoned glass, a locked house. Quite worthy of Mr. Poirot's attention, is it not?" Hastings, offended on Poirot's behalf, retorted sharply, "Poirot will see through it." "He always does." Miss Ashcroft's eyes glimmered. Then I shall be fascinated to watch him at work." Poirot's quiet triumph. That evening Poirot sat with Hastings once. More, he placed the broken cufflink upon the table and regarded it with satisfaction. "Do you see, Hastings? Already the murderer reveals himself. He plants the false trail for the colonel, but in his haste he leaves behind his own mark. The symmetry of the thing. Ah, it is most elegant." Hastings leaned closer. "Then you know who it is?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "Not yet, mon ami. But I know this. The murderer is clever, yes, but not so clever as Hercule Poirot. We have only to wait and to watch, and soon he will entangle himself in his own lies." Chapter 7. More Lies. Surface. The storm that had been threatening for days finally broke. Rain lashed against the mullioned windows of Ravenhall, rattling them in their frames as wind moaned through the chimneys. The house, vast and ancient, seemed to tremble in its bones, but within, the storm was of another kind, one of secrets, half-truths, and whispered lies, which Hercule Poirot now began carefully to unravel. Poirot's little gathering. At Sir Everard's reluctant permission, Poirot convened the household in the drawing-room that evening. The great fire threw shifting shadows across the panelled walls, while the storm outside lent an ominous accompaniment to the detective's quiet voice. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "each of you has told me your story of that fateful evening, and yet each story has the air of something incomplete. So, with your permission, we shall hear again, and we shall see what emerges when the little grey cells are applied." Henry leaned forward, pale and restless. "Do you mean one of us knows the truth?" Poirot spread his hands. "Mais oui, more than one of you. Already I see the pattern, though not yet entire. Let us proceed. Lydia's confession." Poirot's gaze settled upon Miss Greaves. She sat rigid, her dark eyes unflinching. "Mademoiselle, we found in a hidden place a fragment of letter. It was written in your hand. It spoke of despair, of losing all, unless you acted. It was addressed to H. Will you deny it?" For a moment, silence. Then Lydia's composure cracked. Her hands trembled in her lap. "I will not deny it," she said in a low, steady voice. "Yes, I wrote it. To Henry. I loved him. I have loved him since we were children. When he married Eleanor, I thought my heart would break. That night I begged him to meet me, to speak. But he never came. I tore up the letter and hid the page. How you found it, I cannot imagine." Henry sprang up. "Lydia, this is madness. You should not have—" Poirot raised a finger. "Sit, monsieur. Mademoiselle Greaves has told us something most important. She did not deny her jealousy, her despair. Yet, note this, Hastings, she also admits Henry did not meet her. So where was Henry, in truth, when Madame Vale vanished? His alibi, you see, is the weakest of all." Henry's face flushed with anger. "I told you, in my room, reading." "Alone," Poirot murmured softly. "Always alone." The solicitor's revelation. Poirot turned next to Jasper Harwood, whose thin lips were pressed so tightly together they nearly disappeared. "Monsieur Harwood, you have spoken often of Madame Vale's unsuitability. But I perceive something more. You, a solicitor, are also guardian of certain financial matters, n'est-ce pas? Tell us, what is the truth of Eleanor Vale's fortune?" Harwood gave a dry cough. "Fortune? She had none. Rather, she had debts. Pressing debts. Gambling, perhaps. Improvidence, certainly. It was I who uncovered them when Henry proposed the marriage. I warned Sir Everard, but he would not interfere. Eleanor Vale brought nothing to this house but ruin." Sir Everard's hand struck the arm of his chair. "Ruin? You should have pressed me harder, Harwood. I would never have permitted it, had I known the extent." Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, but you did know, monsieur. And yet, the marriage took place. Why?" Sir Everard's eyes flickered to Henry, then to Lady Constance. He did not answer. The doctor's unease. Poirot's eyes turned next upon Dr. Morton, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Doctor, you treated Madame Vale for nerves. You said she imagined figures in the orchard, shadows at her window. But were they imagination? Or did you believe she was being watched?" Dr. Morton removed his spectacles, polishing them furiously. I cannot say. She was highly strung, but She did once speak of receiving notes, anonymous notes. Threatening, she said. I advised her to disregard them. To destroy them, Henry leapt to his feet. Notes? What notes? She never told me. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, but she told the doctor, and the doctor said, destroy them. How convenient, n'est-ce pas? Tell me, Monsieur le Docteur, were these notes truly destroyed, or do you still possess them? Morton stammered. I burned them. I thought it best. Best for whom? Poirot asked quietly. The doctor had no reply. The colonel's silence. Colonel Arbuthnot puffed furiously at his pipe, though it remained unlit. Dashed nonsense, all of it. Young women are fanciful. Disappearances, notes, shadows, it's all hysteria. Poirot looked at him steadily. You are a soldier, Colonel. You know the value of silence, of discipline. But you heard a door bang, did you not, on the night in question? A door that should not have been opened? The Colonel reddened. Well, yes. Might have been anything. Ah, mais non. Not anything. Something. A sound at the precise moment. Do not dismiss it so easily, Poirot alone. When at last the gathering dispersed, voices raised and tempers frayed, Poirot remained by the fire, his small form casting a long shadow upon the floor. Hastings joined him, wide-eyed. Well, Poirot, it's a perfect tangle. Lydia jealous, Harwood hinting at ruin, Morton hiding letters, the Colonel concealing something, and Henry... Well, Henry's alibi is thin as air. They can't all be guilty, Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but in such cases, Hastings, everyone is guilty of something, a lie, a concealment, a weakness. But only one is guilty of the great crime. We must distinguish between the sins of pride, of desire, of cowardice, and the sin of murder. And you think Eleanor is dead? Hastings asked softly. Poirot's eyes glimmered in the firelight. My friend, whether she's dead or alive, one thing is certain. She did not vanish of her own will. No, she was made to vanish, and soon we shall discover how and why. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. The storm passed in the night, leaving Ravenhall washed clean but bleak beneath a cold, colourless sky. Rainwater still gleamed in the grooves of the terrace stones, and the river, swollen and restless, churned beyond the garden's edge. Yet within the house the storm had only just begun. The atmosphere at breakfast was strained to the breaking point. The company assembled reluctantly, as though compelled by duty rather than appetite. The butler moved silently between them, pouring coffee, but no one spoke until Poirot, serene and composed, set down his cup and addressed them all. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, we come now to the heart of the matter. It is not enough to say that Madame Vale has vanished. We must ask, who wished her gone, and why? A ripple of discomfort ran around the table. Sir Everard's fist struck the table sharply. This is intolerable, Poirot. My house has been made into a stage for suspicion. You hound us with questions, you unearth old grievances. What purpose does it serve? Poirot bowed his head slightly. It serves, monsieur, the purpose of truth. And the truth, she resists, but she must come. Henry crumbles. Henry Vale rose suddenly, his face drawn and white. Very well. If it is truth you want, I will give you truth. My marriage, it was not what it seemed. Eleanor and I were not happy. She was restless, suspicious. She accused me of secrets, of falsehoods. And yes, I confess it. There were quarrels, bitter quarrels. Lady Constance gave a low cry. Henry! But Henry pressed on, his voice rising. You all thought her the perfect bride. But you did not live with her, hear her words. She distrusted me, she spied on me. She even threatened... He broke off abruptly, biting his lip. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Threatened what, monsieur? Henry's hands shook as he pressed them against the table. She said she would leave me. That she would expose me, shame me if I did not. He sank back into his chair, his voice hoarse. I cannot speak further. Poirot's voice was very quiet. You cannot, or you will not. Henry said nothing. Lydia breaks. At that moment Lydia Greaves, pale and trembling, rose to her feet. You see, he admits it. Henry had cause. More cause than any of us. He hated her. And I know, yes, I know, he wished her gone. Henry's head jerked up, his eyes blazing. You lie, Lydia. You know nothing. But Lydia pressed on, her composure unravelling. I know she feared you. I know she said she had proof of something that would ruin you. I overheard her in the garden speaking to Dr. Morton. She said she held the power to destroy you utterly." The room erupted into shocked exclamations. Henry staggered as though struck. Poirot lifted his hand. "Silence, if you please. Mademoiselle Greaves, this is most serious. You overheard such words?" Her face was ghastly pale, but she met Poirot's gaze. "Yes, I heard them with my own ears." Henry buried his face in his hands. The doctor's admission doctor. Morton, flustered, wiped his spectacles again and again. "Well, yes, it's true she spoke to me of something, though I never understood it. She said she had knowledge of a matter. Irregular. She hinted at money, at legal papers, but she would say no more. I thought it nervous fancy, as I told you before. But perhaps it was not Jasper Harwood, the solicitor, gave a sharp intake of breath. Papers? My God! He stopped abruptly, his lips thinning. Poirot's gaze flicked toward him. "Ah, Monsieur Harwood, you react most strongly. Perhaps you also know of these papers?" Harwood's face turned sallow. "I know only that Sir Everard entrusted certain deeds, certain securities to Henry's care. If Eleanor had stumbled upon them—" "Enough!" Sir Everard thundered. His face was purple with rage. "This must end. I will not have my son, my heir, accused before strangers in my own house." Poirot's voice cut through the uproar, calm and clear. "Yet accused he is, monsieur. And rightly, for your son conceals much, but whether he conceals guilt, that is yet to be proven." Poirot's pressure. The storm of voices subsided, leaving a tense silence. Poirot rose, his small frame seeming suddenly to dominate the room. "You see, mes amis, the mask begins to slip." Madame Vale did not vanish into air. She was not merely nervous, not merely fanciful. She knew something. She threatened to speak it. And for that, someone silenced her. Lady Constance gave a shuddering sob. Lydia collapsed back into her chair, trembling. Henry sat rigid, his face a mask of torment. Poirot's eyes travelled slowly around the room, lingering upon each face in turn. Already, one of you quakes with the knowledge of what he has done. Already the truth presses upon his lips. And soon, yes, very soon, he will speak. Hastings' reflection. Later, alone with Poirot in the library, Hastings could scarcely contain himself. Well, Poirot, that was extraordinary. Lydia half mad with jealousy, Henry half ruined by some secret, Harwood hinting at lost securities. Good Lord, no wonder Eleanor was afraid. But which of them did it? Poirot smoothed his moustache with great care. "Patience, Hastings. We have reached the turning point. Emotions run high, truths slip from guarded lips. But the grand denouement, it is not yet. Still, I have what I sought, the fracture. When people break, they reveal. And now we know this much. Madame Vale's disappearance is bound not to passion alone, but to money. Always, Hastings, the money." He tapped his temple with a little smile. "The little grey cells, they march closer to the truth. Soon, mon ami, we shall set the trap." Chapter 9. The Trap. The following evening, as the shadows lengthened across the frost-strewn lawns, Hercule Poirot requested that all the household and guests assemble in the great hall of Ravenhall. The fire was built high, throwing leaping flames against the ancient tapestries and gilt-frame portraits, yet the warmth did nothing to dispel the chill that lay in the air. Each occupant of the house entered with the uneasy air of those about to face judgment. Sir Everard was grim and silent, his jaw set like iron. Lady Constance, pale and trembling, clutched her shawl close about her shoulders. Henry Vale's face bore the strained, sleepless look of a man near collapse. Lydia Greaves moved with stiff dignity, though her eyes betrayed a tremor of fear. Colonel Arbuthnot puffed furiously at his pipe, though it remained stubbornly unlit. Dr. Morton kept polishing his spectacles, as if the repeated motion might wipe away his guilt. Harwood, the solicitor, was composed but cold, his thin mouth curved in disdain. At last Poirot appeared, immaculately dressed, his every hair in place, his moustaches gleaming as though in defiance of the gloom. He took his place before the fire, clasping his hands delicately before him. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I thank you for indulging me in this little gathering. You are weary of questions, of suspicions, of shadows, but now the time for shadows is over. We come to the time of truth. A nervous rustle passed through the company. Poirot raised a hand for silence. Poirot's method. You see, he continued softly, a disappearance is more difficult than a murder. A body speaks. It tells us where, when, how. But when a body is absent, then all must be conjecture. Unless, his eyes gleamed, unless one applies the little grey cells, and they tell me, mes amis, that Eleanor Vale did not vanish of her own free will. No, she was made to vanish, and in this very house, among this very company, lies the hand that guided her fate. Lady Constance gave a faint cry. Poirot pressed on. I have spoken with each of you. Each has lied. Yes, lied. Some lied to conceal jealousy, others to protect honour, others to shield their pride, but one has lied to conceal crime. Let us examine suspicions. Poirot turned toward Lydia. Mademoiselle, you confessed your love for Henry, your hatred of his wife. That gave you motive, yes? And the letter we discovered seemed to betray your desperation. It would be easy, too easy, to believe you lured Eleanor to her doom. But no, you are innocent of the great crime. Your sin was only that of the heart. Lydia gave a strangled sob, half relief, half shame. Poirot's gaze shifted to Harwood. Monsieur Harwood, you spoke of Eleanor's debts, of her unsuitability, and yet you concealed something more. Those securities, those papers, were mismanaged, n'est-ce pas? And if Eleanor knew, she could have exposed you. So, did you silence her? Harwood's lips thinned further. I deny it, absolutely. Indeed. You deny, but you do not deceive me. You concealed negligence, perhaps even fraud, but murder, number. You are guilty of cowardice, monsieur, not of blood. Harwood flushed, but said no more. The trap tightens. Poirot turned now to Dr. Morton, who fidgeted beneath his gaze. Doctor, you burned the notes Eleanor received. Why? To protect her? Or yourself? They were trivial, Morton stammered. The work of a prankster. No, they were not trivial, they were true. She was threatened, and you, who should have protected her, destroyed the proof. Your guilt is that of weakness, not of violence. You feared scandal, you feared alarm, but you did not kill. Poirot's eyes swept next to the Colonel. And you, Colonel Arbuthnot, you heard the door that banged. You knew someone went abroad that night, but you held your tongue. Why? The Colonel bristled. Didn't want to point fingers without certainty. Not my place to set a noose round a man's neck on the strength of a sound. Yet it was Henry, n'est-ce pas? You saw him slip out, or you heard his step, and you kept silent out of loyalty. The Colonel looked away, his ruddy face darkening, Henry in the spotlight. At last, Poirot's eyes fixed upon Henry Vale. The silence in the room was taut, suffocating. Monsieur Henri, Poirot said softly, you told us you were in your room, reading. Yet there is no witness. You lied to us all. Where, in truth, were you? Henry's face blanched. Poirot raised his voice, sharp as steel. You quarrelled with your wife. She threatened to expose you. Expose what, monsieur? A mismanagement of funds entrusted to you by your father? A betrayal of trust? She held the papers, did she not? And so you followed her that night. You silenced her. Henry's eyes darted wildly from face to face. No, I swear, I did not kill her. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes glittering. Then where is she, monsieur? Where is Eleanor Vale? Henry trembled, his lips moving soundlessly. The silence pressed upon him like a weight. At last he gave a strangled cry. I cannot say, Poirot's voice cut like a knife. You cannot, or you dare not. Henry buried his face in his hands. God help me, I dare not! The company gasped. Lady Constance clutched her son's arm, trembling violently. Lydia half rose, her eyes blazing with desperate hope. Poirot straightened, his expression unreadable. You see, mes amis? The trap is sprung. Henry Vale holds the key to the mystery. He has lied, concealed, resisted. But he knows, and soon he will tell us all Poirot's reflection. Later, as the hall emptied in confusion and fear, Hastings drew Poirot aside. Good Lord, Poirot, you've got him. He as much as confessed. But why didn't you press further? Force him to admit all? Poirot shook his head gently. Non, non, Hastings. A confession wrung by force is no confession. The truth she must emerge of her own will, when the guilty can no longer endure the silence. Henry Vale is near that breaking point. Tomorrow, tomorrow, I shall reveal all he gazed into the flames of the dying fire, his face grave, his moustaches casting twin shadows. For tonight, we let them think, we let them tremble, and in the morning the truth shall walk forth into the light. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The next morning Ravenhall stood in uncanny stillness. The storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and crystalline. The lawns glittered with frost, the bare trees etched black against a pale winter sky. Yet within the house the air was heavy with dread. Servants moved in whispers, guests lingered in silence, and all awaited the summons they knew would come, and at 11 o'clock precisely it came. Hercule Poirot requested that all assemble in the great hall once more. Chairs were set in a semicircle before the fire. The company entered in strained silence, each face drawn, each eye wary. Poirot stood before them, immaculate as ever, his hands clasped behind his back, his egg-shaped head held high, his moustaches gleaming like two golden scimitars. Hastings sat slightly to one side, notebook in hand, his eyes bright with anticipation. Poirot began quietly. "Mesdames et messieurs, you have indulged me these past days. You have answered my questions, though often unwillingly, and you have endured my little observations. But now, at last, the truth is ready to be spoken. The mystery of Madame Vale's disappearance will be hidden no longer." A collective breath seemed to pass through the room. The puzzle assembled, Poirot raised a finger. "Let us first review what we know. Madame Vale vanished in the night. Her slipper was found upon the terrace, her bed unslept in, her jewels untouched. At first glance, it was the flight of a nervous young bride. But no, the slipper was not dropped. It was placed. Already, there we see the artifice." He turned slowly, his eyes sweeping over them. Next, the curtain cord, frayed, stretched, a sign of struggle, quickly silenced. And then, the doctor's testimony. Madame Vale feared shadows in the orchard. She received threatening notes. They were burned, but the threat was real. She was afraid Lady Constance gave a faint sob. Poirot pressed on. Now, the motives. Mademoiselle Greaves loved Henry. Her jealousy was strong, but jealousy is not murder. Monsieur Harwood concealed negligence with the family's securities. If Eleanor had spoken, his reputation would be ruined. Yet his cowardice is not the act of a killer. The doctor, too, concealed his weakness. The colonel, his silence. And Henry Vale, Henry Vale, he concealed most of all. Henry stirred, his face white. Poirot's voice grew stern. "You told us you were in your room, reading. A lie. You were seen abroad that night by the colonel. You quarrelled with your wife. This you admitted. She threatened to expose you. But what was it she threatened? Not merely your neglect, not merely your debts. No, she threatened to reveal the misappropriation of funds entrusted to you by your father. That is why you feared her. That is why she vanished." The hidden truth. A murmur swept the room. Sir Everard's face had turned ashen, his eyes blazing. "Henry, is this true?" Henry buried his face in his hands. "Yes. God help me. Yes. I used the money. I thought I could replace it, but Eleanor found out. She swore she would go to you. I begged her not to. She laughed, said she would ruin me if I did not confess." His voice broke. "I followed her that night. I meant only to plead with her, but she was furious. She fought me. She seized the curtain cord. She tried to cry out. I stopped her. I did not mean to hurt her. But she fell, struck her head against the stone. She lay so still. Lady Constance uttered a scream. Lydia covered her face with her hands. Sir Everard sat like a man turned to stone. Henry's voice came again, hoarse, broken. "I panicked. I carried her out into the night. I thought if none knew, I might yet mend it. I left her, by the river. The current was swift. It took her," Poirot explains. A deathly silence fell. Poirot's voice was low, yet it carried to every corner of the hall. "You see, mes amis, it was no grand plot, no conspiracy of cunning. It was the folly of a weak man cornered by his own dishonour. He loved his wife, yes, but he feared her truth more. And so, in one rash act, he destroyed her. And himself. He paused, his eyes gleaming with melancholy. Eleanor Vale was not a saint. She brought debts, perhaps troubles, but she brought also honesty. She would not be silent. For that, she paid with her life. And so we see again, murder, it is not always born of hatred. Sometimes it is born of fear, the aftermath. Henry sank to his knees, weeping, while Lady Constance clung to him, torn between horror and pity. Sir Everard rose unsteadily, his face carved with anguish. "You are my son," he said hoarsely, "my heir." "And yet, you have destroyed us all," Poirot bowed his head. "Monsieur, I am sorry. But truth, she must be spoken. To conceal, it is worse than the crime itself," Hastings wrote furiously, his hand trembling. The others sat stunned, their secrets laid bare, their masks torn away. Poirot's reflection that evening, as the police were summoned and Henry Vale taken into custody, Poirot and Hastings stood together upon the terrace. The river ran black and swift below, the bare trees stark against the winter sky. "Dash it all, Poirot," Hastings said quietly. "It's tragic. He loved her, in his way, and yet he killed her." Poirot's eyes were grave. "Yes, Hastings. Love is not always gentle. Sometimes it is selfish, cruel. And fear. Fear is the greater enemy. It drives a man to folly, to violence, to dishonour. That is what we have seen at Ravenhall." He straightened, smoothing his coat with a precise hand. "And so, mon ami, Hercule Poirot has done his duty. The truth is spoken, justice will follow. But remember this. In the end, it is not the shadow, nor the mist, nor even the house that holds the danger. It is always the human heart." With that, he turned from the river, his small figure neat and unyielding against the vastness of the estate. Hastings followed, notebook under his arm, and together they stepped into the waiting car. Ravenhall loomed behind them, silent and mournful, its tragedy complete. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The carriage bearing Henry Vale had departed only an hour before, yet the silence it left behind seemed to echo through every corridor of Ravenhall. The house had been shaken to its foundations by Poirot's revelations, and though justice had been set in motion, no one within could feel relief. Lady Constance remained secluded in her chambers, her fragile form shaken by sobs. Sir Everard paced his study, refusing visitors, his anger and grief mingling in grim solitude. Lydia Greaves sat alone in the music-room, her hands motionless upon the piano keys, her eyes fixed on nothing. Even the servants moved as though under a spell, speaking in whispers, unwilling to disturb the oppressive hush. Only Poirot seemed untouched by the atmosphere of ruin. He sat in the library before the fire, a small cup of chocolate beside him, his posture immaculate, his expression composed. Hastings, restless and uneasy, stood by the mantel staring into the flames. Hastings struggles. At last Hastings burst out, "Dash it all, Poirot, I cannot reconcile it. I cannot believe Henry meant her harm. He was weak, yes, foolish, but to kill her." Poirot raised a hand. "You mistake, Hastings. Henry Vale did not mean to kill. He meant only to silence, to delay, to preserve himself. But the line between the momentary impulse and the act of murder, it is thin, so very thin. He struck at his wife's freedom, at her courage to speak truth, and in so doing he struck at life itself. But surely, Hastings protested, he loved her." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "In his fashion, yes. But his love was a selfish one, a love that feared exposure more than it cherished trust. That, mon ami, is not true love. It is possession, and possession, when threatened, may turn easily to destruction." Hastings shook his head. "Still, it is a terrible thing. And the others too, each of them hiding something. Lydia with her jealous heart, Harwood with his cowardice, the doctor burning those notes." "Just so," Poirot interjected softly. "Each one bore guilt of a kind. Not guilt of murder, but guilt of silence, of concealment. Crimes of the heart, crimes of the conscience. And all together they wove the web in which Eleanor Vale was caught. That is the tragedy of Ravenhall. Not one hand alone, but many, prepared the stage. Yet in the end, It was Henry Vale who struck the final note. Poirot's philosophy. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. You see, Hastings, in every crime there are two parts. There is the deed itself, the blow struck, the poison poured, and there is the soil in which the deed grows, the jealousies, the fears, the pride, the secrets. Without the soil, the deed may never flower. But once the soil is rich with weakness, then even the smallest seed may grow into tragedy. He sipped his chocolate delicately. That is why I say, always, it is the psychology, the human heart, that must be understood. To follow footprints, to test alibis, yes, these are useful. But it is in the soul of man, Hastings, where crime is born, and there also it may be prevented. The aftermath. Hastings was silent for a time, gazing into the fire. At last he spoke, his voice subdued. So, Eleanor Vale, she was the only honest one among them. She saw what others ignored, and for that she died. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Yes, mon ami, she was courageous. She spoke truth where others hid behind silence, but courage, alas, is dangerous when it threatens those who fear exposure. Remember this, Hastings. Truth is like the river outside, slow, patient, inexorable. It will break through all obstacles, but often it claims a victim in its passage. Hastings shivered. And Ravenhall, what will become of it now? Poirot spread his hands. Houses survive, Hastings. They stand, they endure, but the people, they carry the burden. Sir Everard, he will live with his disgrace, Lady Constance with her broken heart, Lydia with her hopeless love. Each has their punishment without need of prison walls. As for Henry Vale, he will face the law. Justice, she is blind, but she is certain. Departure. The next morning the motor car waited at the steps. Poirot, neat as always, stood with his valise in hand, his hat at the perfect angle. Hastings cast one last glance at Ravenhall, sombre and silent beneath the winter sky. A grim case, Poirot, he said quietly. One I shall not forget. Poirot nodded. Nor should you, Hastings, for it teaches us much. That vanity, pride, weakness, these are the true enemies. They are the cracks through which tragedy enters. Guard against them and you guard against crime. He settled himself into the car, smoothing his gloves. And now, mon ami, we return to London. There, perhaps we shall find a case with less of sorrow and more of, what is the English word? Ah, yes, puzzle. The car set off down the frost-rimed drive, the house receding into the distance, its windows glinting dully like eyes that had seen too much. Ravenhall would endure, but its halls would forever whisper of the bride who vanished, and of the small Belgian detective who laid bare its secrets. Hercule Poirot sat back, closing his eyes, his face serene. For him, the case was ended. The truth had been spoken, justice would follow, and Ravenhall would remain, a monument not only to tragedy, but to the eternal frailty of the human heart.